And joining us now on the debate in Calgary, Alberta, Bruce Dobigan, author of The Meaning of Puck, How Hockey Explains Modern Canada. Bruce also writes the media column in the Globe and Mail sports section. And with us in studio, Ariane Siegel, partner in the technology group at the law firm Aird & Burles, Ivor Tossell, online culture contributor to the Globe and Mail, and Dave Fleet, vice president of digital at Edelman, a public relations and government relations firm. And it's good to have all of you around the table. And my friend Bruce, good to see you out there in Alberta, beautiful Alberta, where the Chinooks blow and where you look terrific. Bruce, I want to start. I'm going to have you lead us through why we're having this discussion here today, because it all started, I guess the most prominent example, was a public service announcement run with a guy named Sean Avery, who's one of the most controversial, nasty pieces of business on the ice, but who said something that I think actually captured quite a lot of attention when this came out a few weeks ago. Michael, if you would, roll tape.
I'm Sean Avery, and I'm a New Yorker for marriage equality. I treat everyone the way I expect to be treated, and that applies to marriage. A committed couple should be able to marry the person they love. Join me in supporting marriage equality.
Okay, there's Sean Avery with that public service announcement, after which was followed by a tweet from a guy named Todd Reynolds. Bruce, pick up the story. Who's Todd Reynolds? What did he tweet?
Well, Todd Reynolds is a hockey agent based in Burlington. He's also a Christian, and he went on the Twitter site of his firm, Uptown Sports, and he said, very sad to read Sean Avery's misguided support of gender marriage, and he put marriage in quotation marks. Legal or not, it will always be wrong. And that's what he said on his Twitter account. Okay,
and then there was a sportscaster for Sportsnet, a guy named Damien Goddard, who tweeted a response to Todd Reynolds' response. And actually, I've got that here. Let me read that first, and then you can tell me what happened there. Michael, let's bring this one up. I completely and wholeheartedly support Todd Reynolds and his support for the traditional and true, all uppercase, true meaning of marriage. Okay, Goddard comes out with that, and what's the reaction to that, Bruce?
Well, Damien Goddard was fired the next day. Now, the people at Rogers Sportsnet who employ him have told me that, in fact, they had made the decision to fire him before this ever came out, that this was all after the fact. But the association of Damien Goddard standing in front of a Sportsnet sign and taking a political stance, even though it's a religious one, was a little bit much for them, and so they fired him. They will tell you that this wasn't the only thing, and if you follow Damien's tweets up until then, he has had a very strong religious theme to most of his tweets leading up to that. So this didn't come out of the blue.
Well, in fact, Damien has had nothing to say since then, since he was fired, although he sent us an email just before we went to air tonight, and let me read probably 95% of what he had to say to us here. This is the first time, he writes, I have commented on my termination by Rogers Sportsnet, and I do so under stern threat of legal action. I've never hidden that I'm Catholic. I don't want to hide it, and I know I'm not alone. Nevertheless, 131 characters later, I have a front row seat as lawyers debate the same questions that you grapple with tonight. Can a person be fired for a tweet? Should they be? How do we balance fundamental rights such as free speech, freedom of religion, the rights of individuals, and the rights of employers? Can we create a society where people are free from being offended? Is that the society we want? While these are questions for all Canadians, their cutting edge is ever sharper for media personalities and the companies who hire us. I don't expect the answers to emerge on television in an hour, but I will be watching with interest. Okay, Damien actually asked a bunch of good questions there, so we're going to start to get into those. Now, Ariane, I'm going to go to you first here. As lay people, we may see this simply as a freedom of speech story, beginning, middle, and end. You're a lawyer. Do you see it differently?
Well, the truth is, we're not completely informed about the circumstances of Mr. Goddard's relationship with Rogers. We don't know the background. We don't know details about his employment relationship. We don't have contract details. We don't have performance details. And so although it's very easy to make this into a cause of pitting religion versus free speech, it's not always that easy. And it may well be that, in fact, his contract was going to expire regardless of what happened and any comments he made in the social media. The questions as an employee you have to ask yourself are, should I be taking a position on matters that I'm not authorized to speak about? Am I saying something which in fact may make other people in the workplace feel uncomfortable? And what will this do to my employment relationship? And for employers, the issue becomes, what's my workplace like? Do I have a safe workplace where all employees feel secure and don't feel they're the subject of discrimination?
Bruce, let me just come back at you one more on this. You know, it will be hard for some people to watch this story and say, the guy obviously got fired for taking a controversial position on a controversial issue. So is this, at the end of the day, a free speech issue or something else?
Well, again, I would point out in my research on the story, which I reported on, is that Rogers is making the case and made the case before this happened that he was not fired for this particular tweet, that there was an employment history going previous to this, which also informed the decision. I spoke to Scott Moore, who is the president of Rogers Broadcasting, and while he didn't refer to Damien Goddard particularly, what he said was their standard was don't say anything on your Twitter account that you wouldn't say on the air. That's the same standard. So if you diverge from the standard you'd use on air, you can expect that the company will be judgmental of you.
Okay, Ariane, one more to you. What have the courts said about where my speech stops being my private speech and where it begins to be my speech, representing such and such a corporation?
Well, you have to really look at the context. And in the employment context, the courts in Canada and in Ontario have traditionally upheld the rights of the employer to set the guidelines and the parameters around which employees have to operate, with respect to the use of technology, with respect to use of telecommunications, with respect to postings on Facebook and other public forum. And so when an employer owns the tools at work and an employee is performing in that context, and the employer has set out policies and procedures and maybe even terms in a contract identifying what's proper behavior, then it's for the employee to adhere to those standards. And the courts have traditionally adhered to that and supported the employer.
Even if he's on a personal Twitter account, he can't get away from the fact that his face kind of is owned by that network. Is that the issue?
And that's exactly right. Most companies now have technology use policies or even now social media policies. And they outline the importance to employees to understanding the parameters around which they're in fact free to speak about what's going on in the workplace, about their personal views, or about issues related to the corporation. There are all sorts of issues that companies have to protect, including confidentiality.
And that's the segue that takes us to the next part of our discussion here, which is social media policy, which is a relatively new thing, Ivor. And, you know, I saw the other day Courtney Love got smacked with almost a $500,000 libel settlement, not because she said something bad in a speech or not because she wrote something bad in a newspaper. She tweeted something libelous about somebody, got whacked with a $500,000 penalty. Why is this happening so much these days?
It's a new technology. It puts the ability to broadcast a very small utterance to a very large number of people with a very small bit of effort and almost no thought within arm's length. Anyone has always been able to get up on a soapbox, but it is very easy to do it almost without thinking right now. It's like a booby trap, and it's there. And the bigger you are, and the more followers you have in the social media space, the more easy it is to step on it.
What do you think on that, Dave? Why is this such a... This is a new phenomenon, but it seems that so many people have yet to figure out what the new rules are.
Well, a lot of people say that social media is kind of like an online water cooler. And people are used to talking at the water cooler quite freely and just expressing what they think. And what people often forget nowadays is that anyone can see these postings. I mean, sometimes Facebook postings can be locked down for privacy, but you tweet something publicly, hundreds, thousands, millions of people could see that tweet. So I think it's really important for people to think twice before they post anything online and think, would I want my boss reading that on a billboard as they drive to work in the morning? Would they want to see that in the newspaper?
The courts have, and labor tribunals in Canada have actually really emphasized that point. In a recent British Columbia case at the labor tribunal level, 2 employees were dismissed because of comments they posted on Facebook with respect to their employment and their supervisors. And the court, they were terminated for cause.
This is on their private Facebook accounts.
That's correct. And the labor tribunal upheld their termination for cause and said, look, you were speaking negatively about your employer. you could do damage to your employer's reputation. And not only that, you were aware that you were speaking to an audience of more than 400 people. You had more than 400 friends, and on Facebook, one of your friends told you, do you want to be saying things to all your friends? And you replied, in fact, that's the point. And so when people know that they're saying statements contrary to the interest of their employer, they know they're speaking to a larger audience, you know you have a problem.
All right, let me find out how you all use Twitter. I shouldn't actually assume that you do. Bruce, do you tweet?
Yes, I do. In the last 3 months, I've become a convert.
What do you tweet?
On any subject that I kind of feel like. A lot of the time I'll just be sitting watching a hockey game as I was last night and making comments on the game as it unfolds. What's interesting about it too, Steve, is for somebody in my position is our media, let's say a hard newspaper, though a traditional media, is that we're not crazy about Twitter and things like that competing with us. And so I think people have been reluctant to kind of put together rules about this thing. We've had a couple of incidents where experienced reporters have done things. One reporter in Toronto reported that Pat Burns, the former NHL coach, was dead, and he did it on one authority. And of course, it proved to not be true, and there was a great embarrassment. The other thing that's interesting about it, Steve, is that once the organizations kind of figure this out, guys like me, we're doing this, then they start to say, well, do we have to defend these people? And as far as I found out in exploring this issue, almost all of the major newspapers will defend their staff people when it comes to a libel action. But that's a whole new ground, and everybody's having to make that decision on a case-by-case basis.
Ivor, do you tweet?
I do tweet.
Of course you tweet.
I tweet.
What do you tweet?
Puns mostly. I tweet whatever comes to mind. It is both the best and the worst of Twitter. I hope. I would like to think it's a bit of what I had for lunch, and it's also political commentary.
Really? You tell people what you had for lunch?
If it was really good lunch. Depends on the lunch.
Ivor, really? Who gives a damn what you had for lunch? Honestly.
You know what? I will defend the interest of other people's lunches because it's a slice of life, and it's a metaphor for being interested in sharing your day with other people. And the minutiae of life, taken as a whole, become actually, I think, quite interesting, very compelling.
How many followers have you got?
About 3,000.
Well, that's pretty good.
So, yeah.
There are 3,000 people out there who care what you had for lunch?
I'm not going to vouch for the fact that they care what I had for lunch, but it's an assemblage of things. And for me, the rule of thumb that I try and follow, I'm associated with the newspaper, and in fact, the newspaper puts my tweets up on a special page deep in the newspaper's website.
So you do think twice before you put anything out there?
Always, and I think and I do put more into my tweets in terms of language and topics and discussion and opinion than I might in the columns that I write in the newspaper. But I always think to myself, at the end of the day, would the newspaper not want to be associated with this kind of
Pastrami.
Pastrami?
Yeah, okay,
yeah,
I understand.
I don't even like pastrami.
Dave, do you tweet?
I do, absolutely.
What do you tweet?
A variety of things, frankly. For me, it's, as Ivor said, a slice of life, but also we use it for things. We use it for a lot of our clients, so it's really onto us to really explore the ways that it can be used. We use it for recruiting. We'll use it for sharing best practices. We'll use it for sourcing companies that can work with us. We'll use it for a whole variety of functions,
Okay,
and I use it for learning as well.
But we as a corporate thing, what do you tweet?
And that all applies to myself.
You tweet what you had for lunch?
I do not tweet very often what I had for lunch.
How many followers have you got?
About 13,500.
13,500?
Somewhere around
That's
there.
pretty good. Now, is that just you or is that all of Edelman?
That's just me.
That's just you.
I have a big mouth.
You have a lot of followers. Bruce, I didn't ask you. How many followers have you got?
I think last count around 400. I'm just a laggard, but I only started a few months ago.
You just started a
doing
few
this
months
sort of
ago.
thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Dave,
and you can put whatever you want into it, Steve, and that's, I mean, it's become like the stock quotations you see running along the bottom of the business channels. That's the way it's become for people once you get addicted to it, is you're just always following conversation as you go along, and that's the addictive part of it, is you want to see what people say next.
Dave, yours is presumably a corporate account, right?
No, it's actually my own personal account.
You have your own personal, but you never really are, I shouldn't say you never really are, you rarely are your own guy, right? You're almost wherever you are. If you're out at an event or you're at work or wherever, you're representing Edelman. So do you have to be careful what you write?
Absolutely. I think people nowadays are very, very quick to draw a line between a person and their employer, whether they're posting from a corporate account or not. So I think it really is onto people to think carefully, because whether you like it or not, and whether the law says so or not, people will see that you're an employee of an organization and may infer that the organization follows the same things that you post.
Ariane, how about you?
Our firm has a Twitter account.
You do
and
not personally?
I don't personally. We
See,
maintain.
that's smart. Yeah.
Our marketing department does tweet and is experimenting with that, and they're tweeting my presence here today. My colleague Paige Backman runs a blog at our firm, which has been really successful, and we use it as an opportunity to bring clients up to date on, late developing issues, as well as a platform for our clients to maybe put in their 2 cents and to give us their opinions on different issues.
Don't take this the wrong way, but when was a lawyer ever able to say anything in 140 characters? No offense.
Exactly.
So how useful can Twitter be for you guys?
Well, from an in-depth point of view, you can't convey very much in 140 characters. Certainly from a marketing point of view, you can tweet an announcement, you can tweet, a quick service bulletin, but there's not too much detail you can get into.
Bruce, let me follow up with you on this. I did see your tweets on the game last night, Bruce, and that was an appalling way for the Canucks to get into the finals, although we're happy that they're there. But that was a terrible goal, and you know it was a terrible goal. Is there a guidebook that you or the Globe and Mail puts out or that you follow that helps you insofar as saying, yes, you can tweet about this. If Kevin Bieksa scores at 1:30 in the morning, by all means, knock yourself out. But don't talk about this. You got something like that out there?
I'm not, I have to say, first of all, I'm not a staffer at the Globe and Mail. I'm a contractor, so my relationship is more arm's length with them. I wouldn't speak for the exact relationship with staffers. My position is I've been in the business for 30 some odd years, and I guess they're assuming I will know what good practices are, what smart practices are. It doesn't necessarily always follow, as we've seen with some other people, but it can be the best of things, and it can be totally combustible on you, and you really have to seek some guidance. That's why the point again I made about, well, let's say I make a mistake, let's say I put something in there that doesn't prove out. Will the Globe and Mail defend me in some sort of a libel action? And most of the papers and most of the major mainline media these days are saying that they will defend people in those positions, but it's not guaranteed.
Ivor, are you staff or are you a contract?
I'm a freelancer
You're
as well.
freelancer as well.
So it's an arm's length
Does the Globe
relationship.
have any staffers anymore?
It's a rumor, but I think they do. Yes.
Okay.
And actually, I touched base with them, on this point. And there's a dichotomy out there between organizations that feel they should leave these kind of decisions in the hands of their employers as a matter of best judgment, and that's the approach that the Globe tends to take. It's a writer-centric institution, and I've never been leashed. The other approach to this is to lay down policies, and other newspapers have done that in some detail. And there's 2 different poles. How much do we need to set this out? Because so much of watching your mouth is common sense.
Mm-hmm. You, Dave, obviously with 13,500 followers, have the potential to do a lot of good and a lot of damage if you don't do the right thing. So do you have a guidebook at Edelman that tells you yes to this, no to that?
We do. We have an employee policy around all online behavior, not just social media. And it's communicated to all our employees when they join the firm. And we actually have a fairly rigorous system of training and refreshers for people. I think it actually works really well. And I think the structure of a policy and the kinds of things that a company's going to include in its policy really have to depend to a great extent on its culture and what it wants to get out of being online. So as a company, we actually have a fairly large part of our business that's focused on the online space. So we actually do encourage employees to engage online. We encourage people to get out there, to share thoughts, to learn, to talk with other people. We just help to put some boundaries around it to enable them to go out and know that they're doing things that are actually safe for them, and they're not going to be criticized.
Well, let me follow up on that, because that's curious. Most businesses, I think, never mind individuals, but many businesses today use Facebook, for example, and Twitter to help promote whatever they're doing or find new clients or whatever, members of the Ontario government, people who work for the Ontario Public Service have been told no Facebooking at work, despite the fact that, who knows what potentially good uses they could use of it. Does that make sense to you?
I would take an issue with a lot of companies that institute those kind of policies and block a lot of sites online. Frankly, I think that if you're worried about people wasting time on social media sites, you've got an HR problem, not a social media problem. That means you've got people you can't really trust. And if those people, you're worried about them spending time on Facebook, they're probably going to find other ways to waste their time. So I think I think companies are better placed to educate people around the dangers online, encourage them and train them to go about things the right way than to prohibit them from using these tools.
Are we at a time and place now, Ariane, where companies, big companies I guess mostly, need some kind of guidebook Bible, if you like, that tells all their employees, here's how it works in the new world.
Absolutely, and this started when we really introduced email in the workplace, and we were involved in drafting some of the earliest technology use policies and what are the parameters around email use. And as we all know, that's changed over time. Initially, when email was introduced, it was truly just a business use. But now our business and our personal lives have become so integrated that often we find ourselves using our work email for personal reasons. And the technology use policies help to set out the parameters around what's acceptable and what might be less acceptable and what's totally prohibited and for which you may be disciplined or ultimately terminated. And these policies, for the most part, set out the expectation of privacy. And for some companies, and for the majority of companies out there, that means that there isn't an expectation of privacy. It means what's done on your technology at work or what's done on the internet may be subject to review and may be used in a context of whether it's discipline or otherwise. And I think that's something that's critical for employees to know. And
in your following of all this, Ivor, can you name an organization or a company that you think has a kind of a good social media approach, attitude, guidebook, platform, all that kind of thing?
Most of the large ones do. In fact, if you go online, you Google social media policies, many of them actually post them online. Google is a really interesting example
Of so many things.
Of so many things, but obviously they're the foremost. They're at the forefront of this. They're an organization that at once is extremely secretive about its internal machinations, and yet does a lot of outreach out there. So they're an interesting example because they've got people using social media very much to promote the brand as well as to communicate with customers. Yeah.
Steve,
Bruce, you wanted in?
Well, yeah, I was going to say that email is kind of the Bronze Age version of Twitter. It's sort of, on the progress of mankind, it's sort of along there. Twitter is our current iteration of where we're at. The thing that interests me is that libel and hate speech and all of these kind of things that the companies are afraid of, and justifiably so, used to be defined on a case-by-case basis in the courts. A lot of these things would get settled before they even went through the courts, but there were, the volume of cases that determine what was hurtful speech or hate speech was very small. What Twitter has done has multiplied that to the nth degree. Every day we're trying to decide what is acceptable or hate speech or not. We see here with the Damien Goddard issue and with the Reynolds issue is what we have is people who are Christians who are saying, well, wait a minute, we're being vilified for talking about what we believe and what we're supposed to have defined as our rights under the Constitution. And that's the thing that really interests me on a daily basis. And it's a hard thing for media people to keep up with. How do you define that on a daily basis? And for the corporate people that we're talking to here today, how do you keep up with that too? How do you tell them what's acceptable and what's not acceptable?
It is interesting, Bruce, that once upon a time, if you'd said anything positive about gay marriage, you'd have been, you'd have been taken to the cleaners on that. But nowadays, apparently, if you say anything positive about traditional marriage, that is equally as controversial. I mean,
Well,
that's what Damien's got into, hasn't he?
There's clearly a pushback in the last few years, I think, from maybe some of the traditional Christian churches about what's happened, and trying to stake out the fact that they do have a right to speech on this issue. Even though it's the law of the land that we have same-sex marriage, they feel that they should be able to continue to speak on this issue as a matter of conscience and not be pilloried. And I think if I could take a larger view of this thing, so much of our guidance on this, I think, comes from kind of urban sources through the media. And I think one of the things that we saw in the last federal election is a very different Canada out there, or a morphing Canada, which is maybe getting more conservative, which is redefining what we consider hate speech or what we consider acceptable speech. And I think here we're going to use a buzzword, but media elites in large urban centers, and I would include Calgary in that, have to understand that there's more just than our definition of hate speech or offensive speech.
But Ariane, there weren't very many people banging the drum for free speech after Damien Goddard was fired. There were a lot of people saying he shouldn't have said what he said. What he said was he came out he basically wanted to defend traditional marriage. It was okay apparently for Sean Avery to come out for gay marriage and lend his support to that, but it's not okay to do the other thing?
I think the question goes a step further. should he have stepped his foot into this topic at all? And was that applying good sense? And was that common sense? And
As a sportscaster.
As a sportscaster. And you know, there's one thing if you're a journalist who covers stories about same-sex marriage or the Constitution or issues of that nature, to be getting into these issues and to be making forays into this topic. But it's a completely different issue if one is a sportscaster to be stepping in. And why are you drawing attention to yourself in this regard? Does your company encourage you to get involved in these sorts of issues? The question that Bruce asked or made a few minutes ago was a very interesting one. And that's, what do the courts have to say about this? Have the courts started looking at these issues? And what is reasonable and how do you define that? And that's exactly what the courts have started to do. And in fact, just a few months ago, the Ontario Court of Appeal released a judgment in the case of R versus Cole. It's a very interesting story around a teacher working in a school who had some inappropriate materials of nude pictures of a student on his laptop at work.
What city was this?
This was in Ontario,
Okay.
and the principal, a technician at the school, discovered this and gave the copies of the pictures and gave the computer disk to the principal, and the principal contacted the police and turned this over to the police. And the courts looked, and then the police came and did their own exploration of the computer technology and took what they wanted. And so the courts looked at this and they said, well, is this reasonable? Did the teacher have a reasonable expectation of privacy around his computer at work? And what was the relationship between the principal and the police and the computer and the teacher? And with respect to the police's investigation and their search of the computer, the courts found that that was unreasonable, that he had a reasonable the teacher had a reasonable expectation of privacy around his personal account at work. But with respect
Even
to
though he was at work, it was
Okay.
his personal computer.
But that was with respect to the police. With respect to the principal, the courts found that it was absolutely appropriate for the principal to take hold of the laptop, to take hold of the pictures, and to hand them over to the police, because it was clearly contrary to school policy to have that sort of material at work.
So it was against policy but not illegal.
And well, so that's a question. With respect to the employer, it was okay for the employer to take that, and he violated the rules at work. But with respect to the police coming in and taking this without a warrant, that's an unreasonable search and seizure.
It's clear as mud. Clear as mud. Ivor, go ahead.
Just with regards to the Goddard case, we frame this conversation a lot as you should watch what you tweet, and that is absolutely true.
That's very good.
But yes, well, yeah. But the flip side of this is that from the Sportsnet's perspective, you should watch as an employer how stringently you react, especially if you're in the public sphere, especially if it's a public case.
What do you mean by that? Do you think they overreacted, Sportsnet?
Well, you know, as we've said before, we don't actually know the exact circumstances of him letting go. But one of the things about the online medium is that it's perceived both online and offline as a very personal expression. The things you tweet is kind of from the heart. The things you post on the Facebook page, that's you. And so any move that appears to silence that is immediately interpreted as censorship, as an attack on free speech, as someone being shut down for what they believe in. And then you wind up with this thing on TV, right? You wind up with people talking about it, it becomes a case. It didn't have to go this way for Sportsnet. You know, they could have walked this back. They could have asked that he issue, if not an apology, then he could have walked back the statement. He could have softened his position, and then this whole thing could have blown over. It wouldn't have blown up like this. But as soon as you censor, or as soon as you give the impression of censoring, you have created a free speech issue.
But we're into...
Well, we're talking
yeah, go ahead,
about
Bruce.
a difference. No, we're also, Steve, and you know this better than anyone else, is this idea of one of the things that you take on when you become a public figure, even in something as mundane as the media, as we do, that we are a face of who we represent, who we write for. In your case, TVO, let's say, or in my case, the Globe and Mail. And I think it's one of the deals that you make when you get into our business, that you do give up some of your freedom to be expressive about other issues. when your employer has a different attitude. When it gets to the personal, somebody who's personal account, and maybe they're not a public figure and they only represent themselves. You're a poet, or you're unemployed, or you're a housewife, or whatever. I think they should be free to Twitter and say what they want to. Obviously, there's bounds of libel and there's bounds of slander, but I think we have a different. Unfortunately, for those of us who are long-winded, we have a different standard. I think when we get into the media.
Yeah, but I always thought the world of sports was a different place. I mean, it's understandable why news anchors or reporters who cover straight-up news won't take public positions on controversial issues because they cover it. They have to look like honest brokers. But you guys in sports are supposed to be able to say whatever the hell you want about whatever the hell you want.
We're supposed to be unbiased, but your point a few minutes ago is very well taken. Sean Avery is the public face of the New York Rangers, a public face of the New York Rangers. He's entitled to take a position on same-sex marriage, which I support. Damien Goddard is saying, look, I feel I have a different opinion, or Todd Reynolds, I have a different opinion, and yet I'm facing being fired or severe censure in public for making what is a similarly political attitude. And why can't we reconcile the two? Why can't Sean Avery's freedom be my freedom too?
Dave, I guess the notion of privacy, it's just got a whole new meaning today, right? You can't assume that anything you do is private anymore.
There really is. It's a whole new definition, and I think there's a fundamental tension right now between what the law says and what other people, like the public, say about things. And I think there may be legally, you may be able to say things and express an opinion. But then when you're dealing with the people who are consuming these thoughts, or who are reading your tweets, who are seeing your Facebook posts, they may have a completely different view on the matter. And that's where the education really comes in. That's where companies need to be on the lookout for people who are talking about their organization. And if they see employees who are doing that, then take steps to educate them. And you don't always have to you don't always need to use a hammer. Sometimes you can use the carrot instead of the stick.
Ivor, are there any people out there, like serious heavy hitters in your field, who say, to regulate this is to ruin this? Let's not have any regulations on it at all.
There's always that undercurrent, right? And there's always the information wants to be free crowd. I'm not sure if there's any real talk about regulating this, because it really is, as Bruce says, there is the limits of libel and limits of slander, and then there's limits of employment. And really, you are your own brand online. You are putting on an image of yourself, and do you want to be an employable brand, or do you want to be a brand that nobody wants to go near with a 10-foot pole?
Well, Ariane, do we live in a world now where anytime you go for a job interview in the future, your prospective employer is going to check your tweets, is going to check your Facebook page? Because after all, that's all out there.
Yes, and at the current time, I think you have to have the expectation that that may be asked of you. And some companies have started to take the approach as, we're going to ask for your permission. Is it okay for us during the interview process, during the review process, to check out your Facebook page, to check out your Twitter account?
And what should you, as a prospective employee, say to that request?
Well, that's up to you. And if you're really interested in that job and you feel comfortable with that, then absolutely, that's something that you agree to. But there's some people who...
No, but hang on a sec. There are questions you can't ask in a job interview nowadays. You cannot ask a woman if she intends to get pregnant in the next 5 years. You can't ask what religion people are. You can't ask that stuff. Because it's considered too private. You can ask to see their Facebook page?
And absolutely, you can ask to see their Facebook page, and that's something that's done. But most companies that have a policy of looking into your Facebook accounts or wanting to read what you've posted online will set up a way of doing that. And it won't be the person who's making the employment decision. It may be for a very short period of time. It may be done by a third party who will be looking for anything egregious out there around certain parameters that may twig the interest or a concern or maybe a benefit with respect to the potential employment.
There were instances actually in the States, I believe, where employers or prospective employers were actually asking people to turn over their passwords so they could look inside some of their media accounts.
What do you think of that?
Well, it's horrifying. It really totally is, and that was probably one step too far. The thing is, especially about Facebook anyway, is that whether or not you allow people to look at their Facebook page, there's still a lot of people out there who are laboring under the impression that Facebook is in some way private. And even if it's locked down, it's like water. Information just will go back to the source, right? And especially if you post anything about someone who you're working with, a coworker, a colleague. These are usually people who share your social network, right? So they're going to be looking at this, and it's going to go right back to the source.
Just a couple of minutes left here. Go ahead. ahead, Bruce.
Well, Steve, I know from personal experience that having talked to people that these searches go on all the time. When companies are looking to employ somebody, they're finding out all the public information there is out there. So if you make stuff public on your Facebook page, it's considered fair game. I tell my own kids, I said, look, you know, don't post pictures on Facebook or somewhere else that you wouldn't want to see, that you wouldn't want an employer to see. And the other kind of interesting thing about Twitter, rather, is that a lot of people make the argument that maybe Twitter is to free speech what stand-up comedy is to our regular speech. Maybe we need a place where we can go and offend people and be offensive. Maybe there is a place for that. I know the courts aren't going to likely support it, but the free speech aspect of comedy we hold dear in our society, and maybe there's some way that we can do that for Facebook, for Twitter, and maybe even Facebook. That those are places where you can go and maybe be offensive, but we understand the parameters of it.
Dave, in all of the research I read to prepare for this program, there was one guidebook that I read about that had 3 simple words of advice before you tweet or put anything on Facebook. And the advice was, don't be stupid. Do you actually need a guidebook that goes beyond those 3 words?
I think it is beholden to companies to look carefully at the policies they've got. I mean, you're right. I mean, and I actually used to work for my previous employer had basically that rule of don't be stupid. And after a while, they realized that we needed to actually evolve that. And I think companies do need to look at their policies because there may be areas that do need to change. But frankly, a lot of companies are already fairly well set up in the social media space when it comes to policies. I mean, most companies nowadays will have a set of employee guidelines that they'll have to agree to. They won't, you know, don't talk about confidential information, don't talk about financials, those sorts of things. It doesn't say don't talk about financial stuff offline. It says don't talk about financial stuff. So a lot of guidelines are actually going to cover a lot of these things already. But companies do need to revisit them. You need to look at setting boundaries for employees about, you know, all of a sudden you've got a whole new space to play in around who's your corporate spokesperson. Well, potentially anyone who's tweeting who works at your company could be seen as a corporate spokesperson, so you need to educate around that.
Ivor, once it's out there, can you recall a tweet or is it out there?
It's gone.
It's gone. Boy, that's good to know. Okay, I want to thank everybody for being on the program today. Bruce Dobigan, my pal in Calgary, Alberta. Harperland, as I guess we call it now. Good of you to join us, and don't let the Chinook blow you away. And who do you like in the Stanley Cup Finals, Bruce?
Vancouver in 4.
In 4? Gosh, you're
Absolutely.
When did you become such a cocky Westerner?
We got to get the summer started.
Good enough. Okay. And also, thanks to Dave Fleet, Vice President Digital in Edelman's Toronto office, and Ariane Siegel, Technology Group at Airden Burles, the Toronto law firm, and Ivor Tossell on the other side of the table. You can read his submissions about technology in the Globe and Mail, or the Mop and Pail, as Bruce and I used to call it once upon a time. Thanks, everybody.